Hi, everybody. So I'm Heather, and I am working with the European Organization Design Forum, who is hosting this discussion. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that the EODF's Autumn Fast Track Masterclass is coming up in just a couple of weeks, starting on the 16th of October. There's still a couple of seats left, so if you're quick, you might get one of those last seats. This round of the masterclass is designed to accommodate people who are in the US time zone. So it will be every week starting at 9 a.m. Pacific time on the West Coast. That's noon Eastern time. And then it's at 6 o'clock in the evening for those of us in Europe. The masterclass does contribute towards the Certified Org Design Practitioner certification. So if you're interested, please check it out on our website, eodf.eu. We also promote it regularly on LinkedIn. All right, so now let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about a topic that I think comes up quite a lot in org design and business discussions, and that is how to make your vision and strategy a reality by linking together the everyday operations of a business with the company purpose. And to discuss that with us today, we have a great guest, someone who has a really clear way of explaining these concepts. He is currently professor and associate dean in the School of Economics and Business at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. He joined academia in 2015 after spending 18 years in management consulting, where he worked on numerous org design projects. He's published a book, Organization Design, Simplifying Complex Systems, and several articles, including the one that we'll be talking about today. So I would like to welcome Nicolay Worren.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So let's get into it. Your paper argues that one of the reasons that company mission and purpose fail to be fully realized is because it's not expressed sort of systematically in the structure of units and departments and accountabilities. Can you give us some background on kind of what you observe going on in how companies approach their mission and purpose? What brought you to this subject?
Yeah, there were a couple of observations that made me interested in this topic a few years ago. So one was that there was a increasing interest in the concept of missions and corporate purpose. And as you probably know, there are several books on this topic, and there are Harvard Business Review articles and podcasts and conference tracks and so on and so forth. But what I observed was that most of it was at the corporate level or organizational level. So if you read, at least the books I've read about this topic, when they talk about implementation, they say that, well, as a leader, you have to formulate a compelling purpose, and then you have to kind of motivate the troops, and they have to communicate. That's basically the solution that is mentioned again and again. But I think most of us in this field, we know that communication is, yes, it's a precondition, but it's not sufficient to get people to act. You actually have to get some commitment for action to get things moving. And I think you also have to align the formal organization with the purpose in order to implement it. So that was one key observation. Another one was that I, for several years, used a case that I wrote about a marketing department in a company here in Norway with my students. So this was about basically, the merger of two departments into a larger one. And the case included a description of the new unit mandate after this merger of departments. And it was, I think, 3 or 4 pages of text in this case, but it also had detailed organization charts and additional information. And a couple of times we actually had the head of the department come into class and listen to the students discuss this case. It was a real case. And but one thing I noted, though, was looking more carefully at the unit mandate. It read quite well, but there was something missing. There was something that was kind of not quite right in that unit mandate. And so when you thought more carefully about it, for example, it seemed like by merging these two departments, they had combined a support unit with more a policy unit. So they were supposed to help people in some marketing issues or marketing projects, but also to decide about the rules and guidelines in order to get consistent marketing from different divisions and so on. So they had kind of a dual role that seemed problematic, but that nobody apparently had seen when they formulated this unit mandate. So that was another observation, that even quite smart people with several years of experience in a large organization seemingly have some trouble, formulating a good purpose for their department. So that led me to this collaboration with Shawn, who is the co-author on this paper, where we try to think about what is a unit mandate, and what are the key elements, and what is a good mandate, and how can we ensure that we formulate more effective mandates.
Yeah. So in the paper, you offer a pretty clear structure of what are the attributes of a unit mandate. Can you walk us through that? What is a unit mandate?
Yeah, so the it can contain different elements. So there can be more elements than the ones that we describe in the paper. But what we're saying is that there are kind of three fundamental or essential elements that should be there in every case. And the most important one is what we call the function. So what is the contribution that the unit is supposed to deliver, and to whom? Who are could be internal clients or external clients, or the beneficiaries of the services of that unit. That should be clear. Or the outcome is another word. And then the second one is the domain. So this is basically, it could be a geographical domain if you're talking about the sales unit, but it can also be a technology domain. We are covering software, but not hardware. Or it can be some sub part of the software system. So that has to be clear. And the third one is what we call the authority. And you mentioned, Heather, that some people might react to that term, but if you don't like the term, call it accountability or responsibility or something. So the idea is that ideally it should be clear what the decisions this unit can make without consulting others. So that those are the three elements. But as I mentioned, there could be many additional ones, but we think that these are the essential ones that need to be in place in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah. When we spoke in preparing this session, I shared with you that I use this construct pretty frequently in my work. I think I read it on a blog post that you did a couple of years ago. And that's because I find that a lot of problems in organizations can be drawn back specifically to a lack of clarity about authority, or kind of that accountability and authority are not really matched up. You see a lot of indecision, or people have to continually appeal to like a higher management authority to get decisions made. And so it creates this sort of fragmented process. And indeed, I also mentioned that sometimes people are a little bit shy about directly talking about authority. And in the paper, you talk about formalization of unit mandates as a deliberative process, and how important this is, and that the formalization is not just an artifact like a statement you put on the wall, but it's a process that engages key people in the organization. Can you talk a little bit about formalization and how you might approach a process like that, and what are the sort of things to keep in mind?
Yes. So this is, you could say, partly a reaction to the general trend the last 30 years at least in our field, which has focused on informal relations, culture, leadership, social networks, and so on and so forth. And all those things are important, but I've always felt it to be my duty to remind people that we do actually need formal structure in organizations as well. And we are saying here that it's probably helpful to write things down, because then things become more precise, and you can show drafts to other people and get their feedback. And it can be then a more systematic process where people discuss, what their mandate should be in their unit and what your mandate should be. So that's the kind of dialogue that we envision here. But we also point out, though, that the definition of a unit mandate is not a document, because that's another, error that we can make here. I think that for example, I've seen people who have tried to use ChatGPT to just generate a mandate or automate it. And yes, you might actually, save some time, of course, if you see it as text production. ChatGPT will do it faster. But that's not the definition of a mandate. So it's not the words, it's the understanding that that document creates, and the implicit or explicit commitment that
Hmm.
it develops. So that's the point. So that
Yeah.
when you have this dialogue with people, you indirectly also commit to actually pursuing the mission or the mandate of that department. So formalization is not a goal in itself. It's just a tool, you could say, in order to create that understanding.
Yeah, I think that is a little bit of a challenge of working in the age of LLMs is indeed the cognitive process that people go through in making these agreements. I really think is sort of how they generate the organization to internalize the logic of why we're doing things. It's much easier to remember if you've been through that process rather than if it was just handed to you.
That's right.
And indeed, it generates more commitment. And I work with some younger people who kind of revert to using AI for everything. And sometimes I have to kind of plead with them, like, I know that it would be easier, but really it is valuable to go through the learning process.
Yeah, yeah. I have been trying myself, though, to actually use the criteria from our paper in kind of as a sparring, LLMs as a
Yeah.
sparring partner, and instruct ChatGPT to give feedback on drafts, for example. So I think that type of usage
Yeah.
is better. Mm.
Yeah, definitely. So what are kind of the symptoms that you would see in an organization that would indicate to you that the unit mandates were not kind of clearly enough defined, or well understood enough?
Mm. Well, that's an interesting question. So the the symptoms is probably the right word, because I mean they can be caused by different factors. So it's hard to kind of pinpoint a one-to-one correspondence here. But I mean there are certain symptoms that at least would make you wonder whether there's something missing in this regard. And one can be, if people in a unit describe their unit's purpose in different ways.
Yeah.
That could be a symptom. That they're not aligned. That the purpose is so vague that people just have their own personal understanding. It's fine that people can elaborate perhaps in their own way and related to their own role, but ideally we should have some degree of consistency here. But there are also more objective indicators, perhaps, because we speak about the need for vertical and horizontal alignment. So that is when you go vertically across different layers. If the different units are kind of pursuing different goals and they don't seem to be working in harmony, that can be an indicator that you have not had a systematic process of cascading down the mission down to the department level. And another one is that when you have different types of disagreements and conflicts, across different units or teams, those can be caused by several factors, but it's also likely that it's based on overlapping mandates or goals. which can happen in a complex organization, that two or even more units are, they can have responsibility or partial responsibility, at least, for the same activity or the same domain. And then you have all kinds of discussions about who is the main responsible for it. So there are these kinds of indications that I think, and just maybe the general time you spend on discussing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
That there can be endless discussions in organizations about what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it, and these can kind of just circle around and around and come back. Even if you think things are settled, they can come back in 2 months, and that's often caused by an underlying ambiguity about these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely recognize that. I think there is also a bit of, I've worked in organizations before where when the mandate was not clear, they would tend to, it would result in kind of implicit power struggles or people appealing to some higher authority, and then the quality of the decisions would not be as good because you didn't undertake sort of a structured deliberative process to evaluate data rather than sort of doing things on the basis of gut feeling.
Mm.
So what you just mentioned about vertical and horizontal alignment,
Mm.
that's a good segue into what my next question was going to be. In the paper, you put forward 5 criteria for effective unit mandates, things that they must satisfy: vertical alignment, clarity, coherence, focus, and horizontal alignment.
Mm.
Can you walk us through what each of those is and how you recognize when it has kind of reached the satisfactory level?
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think there is an objective indicator that you have reached a satisfactory level. But I think if you work on this, you will kind of know it. There will be some kind of consensus, that these criteria are met at least. But I can try to go through them. So the first one we have mentioned already is vertical alignment. So the idea here is that hierarchically, units at a lower level, they should contribute to the purpose at the next level collectively. And so I mean, you can just by, if you're a consultant or advisor internally in an organization, I think you just by asking people in different units what they're working on and what their goals are, you will get a sense for whether these are collectively sufficient, to reach to fulfill the higher level mission. In terms of indicators, in my book and in my other work, I do have some more systematic methods that you can use for this, and that's setting things up in matrices and asking yourself questions about what happens with one function if you fulfill another function. So that's there are some methods you can use to be more systematic. And the second one is clarity. So this is where we said that the mandates should be specific about the unit's purpose, domain, and authority, the 3 elements that I mentioned earlier. And we've also said that we have a table that I have a copy of here in the paper, where we say that if there's clarity, that means that managers can hold the unit accountable for performance, and also use the unit mandate to develop more specific KPIs to follow up the unit's performance yes, over time. And then we have coherence. And here we talk about whether the purpose, domain, authority are consistent with each other.
Yeah.
So, and this is like the example I had earlier with the marketing department. You can sometimes see that the elements are not really coherent. And here I have been speculating that you need a little bit of kind of legal type mindset or legal skills to kind of
Yeah, I
detect.
was gonna that was the thing that I thought of as well, as if you put sort of like a policing type of authority together with a policy-making authority, you can introduce some
Yeah,
issues.
but that was just in that example. But I'm also thinking that the ability to spot these kinds of inconsistencies seem to me to be related to kind of some kind of legal
Yeah,
skills,
that way of thinking.
that
Yeah.
we kind of so and but I mean another example could be that you have like in an engineering company that I used to work for many years ago. You could have a unit responsible for health, safety, and environment, and that unit, could potentially be made responsible for HSC performance. But if you look at what authority it has, it might have zero authority to actually, stop, dangerous operations or avoid oil spills or whatever it is, right? So that would be an example of incoherence in the different
Mm,
elements. And then the fourth one is called focus. And here we say that the unit needs the limited non-conflicted purpose. So the idea is that you cannot be responsible for everything. So there has to be a certain area that you are responsible for, a component or module or service, whatever it is. And then finally, horizontal alignment. And here we look at the different units at the same level and try to make sure that they have complementary but also non-conflicting mandates, so you don't have overlap between them. And here's the key indicator. The key indicator is that each unit can fulfill its mandate without hurting the other unit's ability to fulfill their mandate.
mhm.
So this is something you can do a little bit of cross-checking with in a table or matrix,
Yeah.
and ask yourself whether that's possible or not.
Okay. We got a couple of questions while you were describing that. One from Zach. Hi, Zach. So Zach says, in my experience, it's rare to have an OD initiative where you can properly work outside in, allowing each layer to inherit the design of its higher order layer. So for those watching who might not be familiar with this terminology, working outside in essentially means we start with vision
Mm.
and strategy and the purpose of the organization, and then we design to serve that. But oftentimes, indeed, his question then is, what's the risk of working inside out? So let's say a unit sees this, or a manager sees this and is like, well, we need a unit mandate, and
Mm.
they
Yeah,
decide
yeah.
to kind of define their own in isolation. What do you think? What are some things to think about in regard to that?
Well, my general um, attitude here is that it's much easier to establish high quality logical unit mandates in a redesign phase or a design phase.
Right.
Before you have the formal structure and the organization chart in place, that's the time where it's easiest, because then the options are still open, and people have not been allocated to departments. And here I think that unfortunately managers tend to think about this too late. So
Mm,
they tell team leaders, do a workshop and invite your people and come back to me with proposed unit mandate. And yeah, sometimes it works, but sometimes this team consists of different types of roles. The higher level managers have not thought about whether they actually belong together and how this will work. So then the team leader will have a terrible challenge, compensating for this. Nonetheless, in many cases, you do have an existing organization, and you have to work
mhm,
within, the boundaries of that, of course. So and then I think there are many other people than myself who are better skilled to lead those kinds of processes. So I mean, you can still do a lot, of course, within an existing structure. It's just that the options are fewer, and there are more constraints on what you can do. And if you, for example, if you want to change the boundary with another unit, you will have to involve that unit, and they might resist it, and then so on and so forth. So it's much more complicated to do this if you don't have a real redesign process underway. But of course,
yeah.
it depends also how logical the overall structure is. So you know, if you're lucky, it's more or less logical. So it's just a matter of filling in what's missing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in those cases where the organization has just sort of been allowed to kind of naturally evolve in a way, you end up with these behaviors that are some of the symptoms that we talked about of having poorly defined mandates become really entrenched and become like a very a part of the day-to-day life, the culture, the
Mm,
behaviors, the way people interact,
mm.
and then that becomes its own sort of challenge to battle back that inertia. And then there's another part of your article that really resonated with me towards the end, where you talk about ambiguity and strategic planning is a way of masking ideological differences and accommodating the perspectives of diverse stakeholders. So sometimes managers will avoid that clarity kind of strategically so that they can make it look like we are um, pleasing everyone, that we are deferring conflict, we are able to do that. And I think that that challenge will, of course, get more and more difficult to surmount the longer the situation goes on.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you know, for most employees, these things are perceived as very paradoxical, and you know, they can live with some degree of paradox. But I think
Right.
it can be quite frustrating over time.
I think it creates
Yeah,
burnout as well because
yeah,
it's sort of that the job is not right-sized to
yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah.
and they can get lost in the complexity.
Right.
So we got a couple of other questions here. One is, what is the essential difference with functional requirements and avoiding functional coupling?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we actually talk about those concepts in this article, but my co-author Shawn Pope and I, we have another article where we partly deal with similar issues, and where we talk about the concept of functional conflict, and the idea there is that you could use a more a simple word, goal conflict. We're basically talking about the fact that when there are goal conflicts between roles or units,
Mhm.
the main prescription that we have is to separate them in different units. So I mean, we touch on this in the current paper that we're talking about now as well, and it has to do with horizontal alignment. So that's a criterion you can use. So if you know the goals of different roles,
Yeah.
the general advisor is to separate those that have conflicting goals. Because that's another source of friction inside the team. And then we can discuss, you know, the details of that. But that's the overall concept. And the commentary mentions functional coupling. But so this functional conflict is our term, but it's based on
Yeah.
another concept called coupling that comes from Nam Su, who was a professor at MIT before he retired. So we have borrowed some ideas from his framework there.
Okay. And then the next question, what about having also set clearly who sets objectives and evaluates performance for the unit based on their service execution? When performance is involved, attention to that usually has a different degree compared to just another document. So I think this is
Mm.
about kind of linking those objectives with performance evaluation.
Well, or with the point that you made earlier about the process of establishing the unit mandate. So in the article, we describe, as you mentioned, Heather, that this has to involve managers at the next level in the organization, as well as you know, units at the same level. So that it will not be an internal document the way we see it, but something which
Mhm.
has been agreed with the line manager that the unit reports to. And we're also saying that that we believe that if there's clarity about the unit mandate, it's much easier to develop KPIs, because that's another task that many people in our organizations are struggling with. What should be our KPIs, or what do you call them these days? OKRs. Um,
OKRs, yeah.
yeah, exactly. But we think that it's a much simpler task if you have clarity about the mandate. Then it's just you just decompose the mandate, and it will take you 10% of the time that you otherwise would need to figure out what the KPIs are. So that's just closely related, and that's the basis usually for evaluating the performance that
Yeah.
this comment brings up.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask now how we can assess whether unit mandates are contributing towards organizational effectiveness. So let's say we've put this into place, we put
Hmm.
this system into place, we've defined our mandates reasonably
Yeah, yeah.
satisfactorily, kind of in a qualitative view, you know it when you see it, how do we feel
Hmm.
in it? How do we kind of assess how it's going or if adjustment is needed?
Well, I mean, there are perhaps two sub questions here, because one is, if I understand you correctly, so one is about whether and how unit mandates contribute to
Yeah.
organizational effectiveness in general, and there in the article we propose a framework that has yet to be tested empirically, but other researchers could try to do that by collecting survey data um, in organizations and correlating it with organizational effectiveness. So because we basically propose a framework that links these things together, so that we predict that if you have high quality unit mandates, that will increase unit accountability. It will also make collaboration between units easier, and it will also increase the individual level role clarity. So that in turn should lead to unit effectiveness, and to a large extent, unit effectiveness aggregates to organizational effectiveness. So the only exception here is that there might of course be external events that also have a big influence on organizational performance. So it's not 100%, but that's the linkages. Those are the linkages that we propose in the model. But that has yet to be tested. It's a conceptual
Right.
model. But I think at the same time, I do think that this model basically summarizes a lot of existing research on organizational effectiveness. So it would surprise me greatly if it's not confirmed in some way, although there might also be some modifications needed. So that's the more academic part of it. In an organization, you could also try this in a smaller scale. I mean, if you have an employee survey, I do think that it's useful to have some items that reflect these factors that we have discussed, so that you can to get a sense of this internally, what the situation is. So I find that traditionally employee surveys have focused a lot on job satisfaction and the social environment and so on, and those are important, of course. But you could also include some elements about the units that people belong to, and then you will get some feedback on this. And in a large organization, you can even do a mini research project. And actually, if you have several different units, your divisions with several units within each, like in the engineering company I worked for, we had 20,000 people and 53 different units. So there we could actually do some research internally based on all those numbers. And in terms of feedback over time, well, I mean, I think it is related to the things that we have touched on, that you probably periodically have to revisit the unit mandate because things are changing. We don't talk about this in the article, but that's natural. When the world is changing, that you will have to make adjustments. to the unit manager over time. And so that's something we could have expanded on in the article.
Oh, you cut out for a second. Okay, you're back. Okay. I was going to ask something else. Oh, when I have worked with this model in the past, I remember I was doing a session with like the heads of departments in a company that I was working with, and we were going through really defining kind of the purpose and how these are complementary, and starting with the purpose and mission of the business as a whole. And at one point, one of them said to me, "Should we have done this before?" And I do think there's an element where you notice that these general org design skills are not always something that is sought after in management roles. Let's say
Mm.
that's not something
Mm.
people will necessarily get promoted for. We just had the EODF conference in Budapest, and this was one of the arguments of one of our keynote speakers, that we need to think about this as a capability.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
you also write in this article that where is it? I just had it. That this sort of the skill of like job crafting, the skill of mandate crafting is maybe
Mm.
something that we need to think about. That one may need certain clinical skills or
Yeah.
judicial
Yeah.
reasoning skills to formulate effective unit mandates. How do you see that kind of playing out? Do you feel like that's an area of emphasis for companies? Is it kind of a big blind spot? I think it's hard to get people in a room who don't have any experience with these constructs. They really seem to need a guide. And I guess that's sort of where we come in as org designers.
Yeah, they probably do in some cases. So I mean, they might need somebody to help them for sure. And yeah, we do speculate that there are certain skills needed because we have seen several versions of mandates that don't seem to be that clear or logical. And but I mean, there might be perhaps reasons for that. It could be, I don't know. There might people at the level above might not have asked for it, right? They
Mhm.
might have just constructed the organization chart hastily, and they have maybe very action oriented people, so they want things to get moving, and it's also I think it's partly the case as well that these things they become a concern once you experience the negative consequences of a lack of clarity, right? So that's when people start complaining and
Yeah.
because of their frustration, and that gives you the energy to ask an internal or external consultant to help them or to set in motion a process when they actually dedicate time to it. But as I mentioned before, I mean, if you are aware of these things when you are developing the organizational model, you
Mhm.
can save enormous amount of time later, because then yeah. So in general, it's unfortunate that you develop an organization chart and it takes like 7 months to realize that it should have been different. So I've always been advocating that we invest a bit more time in the planning phase, because I know from experience that it's so difficult to roll things back once they have been implemented. So yeah, but I've also worked as a consultant, as you mentioned, for 18 years, and I think 90% of the clients I had, they were quite impatient people, so they wanted to make quick decisions. But I always try to say that by investing more time in the planning phase, we actually reach the goal much faster, because instead of 12 months of confusion, we get maybe 1 month of confusion. I never said that you would get 0 months, because there will always be confusion when you do something new, but it will not be as bad as it can be. So and I think I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but my um, my thinking here is also that you don't necessarily need complete unit mandates before you implement a new structure, but at least you need to think about the function of each unit.
Yeah.
Because if you just have a box on the a box on the organization chart, that's not very much information to use as the basis for these quite critical decisions. So you need to know at least the function. We have at least one sentence, this unit is supposed to deliver X to group Y, whatever it is, right? So that you need that. So that's the functional perspective, which I call it a functional approach to organization design. So you know what the units are supposed to deliver. So that's the minimum, and then you can think about the domain and the authority if you have time and ability. So and so if you just have those rudimentary elements in place, then of course it's much easier for the people in the unit to come together and write the whole thing and do it in a more detailed manner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because I've certainly heard the same thing from leaders that I've worked with. Couldn't we do this much faster? I could just sketch out the org design on a napkin and then we would have it. And the question I would always ask is, have what faster? Have
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
a design that you sketched out on a napkin? Yes, you could have that very quickly. We could have that in, under an hour. But if you
Mm.
want to have a kind of functioning organization where people have internalized the purpose and really understand their roles, then at some point you have to involve people. You either do it early, you do it later, but it's not a step that you can skip.
Mm.
Uh, and indeed, it definitely seems like investing that time upfront will shorten the sort of time to value of an org design.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Okay, so I think I have one last thing that I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about, which is something you've alluded to a couple of times. So you talk in the article a few times about the importance of designing mandates in a top-down manner. The choice of terminology mandate implies that it's something that is sort of ordered. But mandates can be influenced by bottom-up processes. And then you
Mm.
mentioned that decentralization is negatively related to vertical alignment. So there are a lot of kind of new structures that are out there that are highly decentralized, self-managed, and that there is some research that implies that uh, this is not necessarily, I guess, consistent with having a kind of clear focus as an organization. What do you think about that? I know I don't have a clear question, but I just want to hear you talk
No, I
about
think it's clear enough. So, of course, there are different views here. So this is I accept that people have see it differently, but and both in practice and in the real world and in my world, which is academia, there's a lot of interest in decentralized organizations and autonomy and
Mhm.
so on and so forth, autonomous teams, and all that is well and good, but the challenge we point to in our article is that if you want effective organization, you also need to have a coherent organization. So these units, they cannot be so autonomous that they just move in their own direction without being a part of the whole. So that's why we suggest here that you need at least some top-down orchestration of this process, so that you can get input from everybody from all levels, but you need some coordinating role here to make sure that you avoid, for example, the horizontal misalignment
Yeah.
issue that we talked about before. But I can just add briefly, though, that I think this will depend a little bit on which sector you are in and which type of organization you are in. So in some organizations, because of the work processes and technologies, you need quite tight integration, and you really need to have full alignment. In other organizations, you can be more loosely coupled. So right now, I'm at my job at my office in my university. So the university is an example of a relatively decoupled organization with quite decentralized, autonomous schools, faculties, departments, and so on. But even here, we cannot do anything that we want. I mean, there are certain issues here that also are centrally determined. I mean, for example, salary policy is that's one committee at the whole
Yeah.
university that sets the policy for the entire university, even though there could be grounds for making local adaptations and so on. So um, so it depends on what kind of company it is or organization it is, how tight this alignment needs to be. But at least we raised the issue and I think that people who are advocating for highly decentralized organizations, they sometimes forget the inefficiencies that might result from that. I mean, also we have tendency of duplication of effort, uh, you know, uh, not very efficient utilization of resources because you don't share enough resources across different units and so on and so forth. So it's not. I mean, there are some challenges there that we have to acknowledge. I think, even if we agree in principle that it's good to delegate responsibility as far down as possible.
Hmm. Yeah, that is something that I encounter quite a lot working in agile or organizations that are intended to have the most flexibility sort of in the roles that are directly delivering value to customers because they are maybe quite a niche industry. And so it makes sense to have the subject matter experts making a lot of those sort of strategic decisions. But one of the things that always kind of breaks down is that people will often think that, oh, we should have self organizing teams. So that means they should figure out everything.
Hmm.
Or that means we can't kind of tell them what to do in any way, or we can't
That's right. Yeah.
sort of build a stricter structure. And I think that being clear about the constraints within which you are designing, being
Hmm.
clear about what is our shared purpose, you can certainly bring those people into the conversation, but you still need to have the conversation.
That's
And it
right. Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
mean that there should be no structure. It just implies that maybe the structure should be developed in a somewhat different way.
That's right. But I can also mention here that what we are talking about in the article is really organizational architecture, you could call it.
Yeah.
And if you have a good organizational architecture, that should specify things like mandates, the interfaces between different units. And if you have that in place, then each unit can act quite autonomously
Yeah.
in fulfilling its mandate and mission. So it's when you mix these things up that it gets complicated. But you do need. This is inspired by earlier work I've done on modularity, which is all about this combination of rigidity, you could call it, and flexibility. So by
Hmm.
being a little bit rigid in terms of the architecture, then you actually create more flexibility and freedom for the individual units.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's more satisfying to work in an organization like that where you don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel and figure out all that stuff from
I,
scratch.
I would think so as well. Yeah.
All right. We have a comment here. Yeah, I think this is consistent
Mm.
with what we've been saying. Even autonomous units must know their mandate.
Mm.
Indeed. Okay, so if there are no other questions, is there anything else that you would like to share with our viewers, Nicolay, before we close up? Is there anything that we've missed?
I think we have touched on most of the key points in the article that we wrote. Um, Maybe I can just add that we're very happy to hear that consultants like you, Heather, and can use this framework. And we're also, uh, you know, uh, looking forward to any feedback that you have or ideas that you have. We are continuing this work. We're working on other papers, so
Okay.
do get in touch if you're working on this year and trying to apply this framework yourself.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's to anyone in the audience. Also, I am continually working on building workshop structures that sort of reflect this construct and how we can bring it to life and how we can use it as a kind of chartering
Mm.
function. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you very much, Nicolay, for your time. I really
Okay.
enjoyed the paper and hope we will speak again soon. And have
Thank
a
you
good
so much.
evening, everybody.
Take care.